Did you see in Florida last week, snowing buckets? I mean, it record snow. 24 hours in office, and Donald Trump solves global warming. Welcome to Grounded, the place to hear the salty truth. I'm your host, Scott Cates, coming to you live from the Northeast Georgia mountains and the tiny town of Tiger, where today it's a little overcast, been raining tonight. Feels kind of like a little tropical out there. Got out there when the sun was peeking through earlier and got a little tropical feel to it. It's supposed to be like 70 this next and up and coming Monday. In the upper 60s later on this week. That's going to be interesting, going from tropical from freezing temperatures to tropical. It'll be kind of nice. Sort of welcome. God, you talk about a change. Last week I talked about the hard right turn. Boy, we've taken an incredible right turn for those of you that listened to last week's podcast. A couple of things I really kind of wanted to address from last week's podcast too, as well. The historic snow in Florida. Let me talk about that first. The historic snow in Florida, literally 24 hours after Donald Trump gets into office, it dumps like 8 inches in New Orleans, 9 inches in Mobile, Alabama. And then in parts of Florida, something like 10.5 inches. It sweeps through southern Georgia, dumps 5-6 inches there. Just an incredible phenomenon. Historic. I mean, in parts of Florida, it's been 60 years since they'd seen any sort of significant snow. But in places, this was just a record for them. And I'm joking about it. I mean, it was obviously... I had to check the executive orders here to see whether or not he'd signed one for global warming. But the reality, it's 24 hours after that, and we see this take place. And the sad part about that is actually there's probably more science behind that base than was the entire COVID-19 boondoggle, and also what's gone into the woke agenda. Way more science in what happened in the first 24 hours of Donald Trump's inauguration to back that up, I would think. And so I've looked out there. Here's the thing that I think is going on right now. Let me back up for just a second before I get into that. Let me back up and just say this. Those of you that listened to the tent story, all of you that chimed in for that, thank you. I'm glad that gave you a laugh, that you were able to laugh at that. That's great. My brother-in-law actually did remind me. He said, you bought the wrong tent, Scott. That's what the issue was. You actually bought the wrong tent. I was aware of that about 2 seconds after I opened the box. And so for those of you that think that I ever remedy the situation, if you want to know the rest of the story, I actually ended up buying a 4-man tent after that you could actually stand up in, still kind of compact, and it has a vestibule out front, which is like a garage for your Harley to pull in. So yes, I upgraded tents. Let's talk about what has just happened really over the last week, what's taken place. Because, and I know you think probably I'm going to go into the details of things that Mr. Trump has done. I am going to do that. But I really want to talk about really an overall just turn. And it's an overall turn in attitude that has taken place. I went into Walmart to pick up a few things. And this was, I want to say Friday. It may have been Thursday or Friday of last week. I can't remember exactly which day. But I went into Walmart on Thursday or Friday. And it was amazing because people were not isolated. They weren't sort of had their heads down. They were in small groups all throughout Walmart, laughing, big smiles on their face, talking about their families. And I looked up and as I went from place to place in the store, I watched this happening. And there was this just an overall attitude change all together. And then church on Sunday morning, going to church on Sunday morning and watching the people as they came in. As we were leaving, I was talking to some of the men that were greeters at the door at church and they said, man, there's a whole different attitude in the lives of people that's going on right now. And the question was, what is it? The answer is, so the overall question is, what has just happened here? The answer is leadership came to America. I mean, leadership came to the United States. That's exactly the best thing I can sort of explain to you, and we'll go into the details of that as we unfold the podcast today. Leadership. If you take a look and you go back and you look, if we go back 4 years ago, and we go back to the election of 4 years ago when that all took place, we were in the COVID, whatever, all of that, and people were sort of, to be honest with you, there was a confusion in that day that was unlike anything else we'd ever gone through in America. Now, we'd gone through some things that were pretty serious. The 2007, 8, 9 recession was huge because for us, we didn't realize that property values actually could go down and that you could actually lose your retirement, and that there were things that took place that blew us out of the water then. That was not an easy time. But during the last 4 years, coming out of COVID and all of the mandates and all of the things that had taken place, all of the, you must go get the shot. Are you going to keep your job? Are you not going to keep your job? Do your companies have the authority to fire you? We watched the federal government literally let go of 8,000 plus service members who rejected getting the shot. Nope, you can't. If you decide not to take the shot, you're fired. Federal, the military, I'm talking about 8,000 plus in the military, and then the federal government, you're required to take the shot. Many healthcare organizations requiring their people to take the shot. If they didn't take the shot, you got fired. I mean, we saw this take place, and there was just an uproar nationwide on how was this going to happen, what was going to happen here. Then now we see that it didn't really make a difference anyway, in all of it. And then the things that were hidden, the things that were hidden are now beginning to sort of come out, about the reports of actual science in that day, and all. They're now beginning to sort of come out. Even in just 1 week, they're coming out saying, we can't cover this up anymore. We can't shove this down. We can't hide this. We need to just get this out there and restore some faith back to the American people here in our leadership. And so a lot of things are coming out right now. And part of that is fear, because leadership has come back to the White House, and a part of that is fear over someone actually cares what is actually happening. Now, I know some of you may think that might not be a fair statement, but let's take a look at the different leadership styles, because let's take a look at the heart of the men for a minute. By the way, this is opinion. Most of the time that, my podcasts, they're mostly satire, really, in the things that we talk about. We get down to, biblical relevance in all of it at the end, yes. But it's satire. It's all opinion. It is. So you get to hear opinion today. Maybe you'll agree with it. But here's what I see. Let's take a look at leadership styles. Let's take a look at the reason why Mr. Biden went into office, first of all, to just start with that. What was the whole purpose for Joe Biden to take office? Was it truly that he wanted to lead the country? I don't think anyone can actually say that he really wanted to lead. We don't know his heart. I'm just sort of guessing here that it didn't seem like that. And some people say, well, maybe he didn't know how to lead. And if you look at a back track record for him as a politician, you can see that he really didn't know exactly what to do. So we had a lot of people around him, pushing agendas, and we didn't really have clear leadership. If you take a look at even currently today, just even, for instance, the nominees that are going onto the president's cabinet here at this point, the people that he is putting into place, when's the last time you actually remembered the names of the people who were going into those offices? It matters right now. And it matters. And the reason why these names are being remembered is because they are strong leadership. Mr. Biden going into office, opinion says he really liked the idea of being the president. He made history, like the title. As far as leadership, it could come and go. But as far as the title, it gave him power. It gave him the ability to do some things, censor the American people. Your will go with his narrative. Gave him some power to be able to, take care of some, things he needed to take care of, legal issues, pardons, all of that. Let's just take a look at the pardoning of his son for a moment. I don't think anyone in America didn't think he wasn't going to do that. We've talked about this in another podcast before, but no one in America didn't think that he was not going to pardon his son. It never crossed my mind. And there was no way to win in this situation for him. So it was either going to be, if he didn't pardon his son, he was cruel and heartless and had no mercy and all of that. If he did pardon his son, then he was the typical father. So there's no way to really win. The problem came not because he pardoned his son, but because up front, he said, I will not interfere with the legal proceedings of my son. That's what he said up front. He basically told America, I will not pardon him. I will not interfere with the justice system. Now, what happens is that there were a number of things that had been spoken like this, and he reneged. Now, that's just one thing. And to be honest with you, do I blame him for reneging? No. Was the whole intention all along to pardon his son? I don't know. I'm not Mr. Biden, but it looks like, and with the pardons that were given after the fact, it sort of looks like it wasn't about necessarily leadership, let's say. Not to say he didn't make the decisions well to do that. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that he led you one way and did exactly the opposite. That's not good leadership. It really isn't. With the Biden administration, it wasn't what you see is what you get. It's what we see is the only thing you get to see is what we want you to see, and you better not see anything else. Or there will be difficulty coming to your life if you try to see or reach in or express anything else other than what we are telling you. That's not real good leadership. Just saying. And we've changed that to Mr. Trump's, which is what you see is what you get. And he's all now, absolutely, let's be Mr. Transparency and, let's get out there and show what the federal government has done. So, you move from really sort of where is he going to move next? After 4 years, the American public was like, where's he going? We have no idea. We're not sure that he even knows who he is at this point. Now, the thing about that is that's what you see in politicians often. You see this idea that they are passionate about the position, but they're not quite sure how to lead in it. Whether it's the president, and it takes a little bit of that learning curve, especially if the person going into the office is senator, congressman, whatever going in. Not different for a governor most of the time because they've actually had to govern something, not just sit and write policy. So anyway, I'm moving out of that for just a second to talk about this. What's the change that you're seeing? Well, Donald Trump is not your, absolutely, we know this. He's not your politician. He's not a politician guy. He's like an American businessman, very successful entrepreneur in so many different ways. And he's used to, let's make a decision and let's go in that direction. Now, the reason why that's important, I remember an interview with George W. Bush a long time ago as the president of the United States. And he said, to be a good leader, you must make decisions and stick to your decisions. You don't waffle on those because it makes you look insecure. And it makes you appear to be insecure. And we've had a lot of waffling going back and forth One thing being said, another thing being done, a lot of covering up, a lot of hiding, a lot of all of that's been taking place over the last 4 years. And now you see someone coming forward and saying, look, we are of the people, for the people, by the people. Let's get to the people. This is what the people want. Not just 1% of the people. This is what 98% of the people or 90% of the people or whatever want to do. And Mr. Trump steps up and says, I'm here for you. And he's got a point. He's like, I'm a multi-billionaire. I don't have to do this. I'm actually here for you. And it's time to make America. It's time to actually go back and grasp a hold of the foundation of America and make it a great country. That's the message, by the way. I'm just saying. That's the message. And so in that, really in his first few hours, it's really interesting. Things in my pending pile today that I'm looking at, it's really an interesting thing because the one thing that we've seen taken place in the past with the Biden administration was now it's going to be we started moving in a direction of extreme liberalism. Won't need to go in. I don't need to rehash all of that. What I really want to do as I look today, in the first few hours, literally in the first few hours of his presidency, the first 24 hours, really less than that, really the first day after he was inaugurated, he sat down and he had a list of things that he had to revoke, and he had a list of things that he was going to put in place. Now, this is not the exhaustive list, but the things that Mr. Biden had in place, that he had to revoke those first. And I just want to go through and read you a few of these things that he revoked. And then we want to talk about the executive actions he actually put into place. So here's what he revoked. He revoked the executive order preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. So basically, that order was basically you can believe you can and want to be anything you want. Doesn't matter about biology. Can't discriminate against you on that. That's one of the things that Biden had in place. Protecting this another order. Protecting public health and the environment, and restoring science to tackle the climate crisis. And we saw how well that went. It was just a lot of money thrown in that direction, but not necessarily much happening as far as protecting the climate at all, because it's hard to prove that any of that actually works. The executive order to protect the federal workforce, and that is from lawsuits or anything that might happen. If you're federal, you're untouchable. That's a part of that. To eliminate the use of privately operated criminal detention facilities. That's what Mr. Biden put into place. He stopped the ability for private sectors to have their own ability to incarcerate people, and was solely going to be on the basis of federal funding from that point. He revoked the President's Council on Advisors on Science and Technology because they saw that didn't work either. What a farce. The next order he revoked was tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. Okay. The next thing he revoked, the strengthening of Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, have been revoked by Donald Trump. The next thing, creating a comprehensive regional framework to address the causes of migration and to manage migration throughout North and Central America and to provide safe and orderly passage and processing of asylum seekers at the United States border. He revoked that act as well. The next I have highlighted here, rebuilding and enhancing programs to resettle refugees and planning for the impact of climate change on migration. So evidently, I guess they thought that people are migrating here all because of climate change. Interesting. He revoked that for sure. The establishment of the White House Gender Policy Council. So the White House had a gender policy council together. And I'm not sure quite how all that worked. They look up and they go, so what are you? And, how do we study that? I'm not sure. Anyway, the next executive order is the establishment of the Climate Change Support Office. Yeah, that was needed. Saw how that worked in California lately. Let's see. The next is the diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the federal workforce executive order. He revoked that, the DEI. The next is strengthening American leadership in the building of clean cars and trucks. He revoked that. Of course he did. He revoked catalyzing clean energy industries and jobs through federal sustainability. This, I think, is a really big act to be revoked here, because this is where the federal government funds a corporation that is going to, this is where they get a grant basically to go in and create ideas on clean energy. But the fact is, a lot of times they would get the grant and never start the companies. And so they're just funneling money into clean energy ideas. Things that would have federal sustainability. That means that they would pump the funding to it, eternally, if you want to get it down to, no, we're not doing that. This is Trump saying, nope, we're pulling that. He also rescinded executive order for advancing equality for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex individuals. So basically what he did was he said, no. We're not giving you equality for your sexual fantasy. That's exactly what he did. We're going to rescind that, which is wise, I think. Because, folks, listen to me. Anything we've learned over the last 4 years, that as soon as the sexual fantasy changes, we gotta add some new category. And it's changed. It always changes. Evil just goes rampant. Keep going. Let's talk about the withdrawal of certain areas of the United States Arctic coast of the outer continental shelf from oil and gas leasing. So the bottom line, so they withdraw the ability to drill there in those places. He rescinded that order. The revitalization of our nation's commitment to environmental justice for all. Don't you love this? This is our nation's commitment to environmental justice for all. How about just justice for all would be nice. Can we have a committee for that? But anyway, he rescinded that. And then the withdrawal of certain areas off the United States outer continental shelf from oil or natural gas leasing. He withdrew that too as well, because one of the things that the Biden administration did spelled out all the places that once the new president would take office, that the nation would be hung up in and unable to drill. And this is what I've been told over the last week, probably could be speculation. It's something that I have been in discussion about, of why did we have to make the change? And I grew up in Northwest Florida. Why did we have to make the change on the Gulf of Mexico? I grew up in Northwest Florida, and it was always the Gulf of Mexico to me. So in the whole idea of changing it over to the Gulf of America, I thought, there's a part of me that said that's kind of a little cheesy. I don't know. But then it was sort of explained to me, and I get it now, that some of the documents that said we could not drill in the Gulf of Mexico, as long as you changed the name to the Gulf of America, the area would be access for the ability to mine its resources. And so that is one of the reasons why the change took place. Whether that is the case or not, I do not know, but it sounds legit. Sounded good to me. Anyway, let's go on. So that's it. So bottom line is, really in the first few hours, he rescinded 78 executive actions and orders of the Biden administration. You heard some of those. That's not the full 78, but that is a few. And he put these things into place. Now, this is where you see, because all of this other stuff is sort of like grasping at the wind. These things that, these executive orders really that we're looking at that Biden had put into place, it was almost like make work in some ways and grasping at the wind. Hey, let's go give rights to this fantasy or rights to that. Or, my goodness, it's crazy. I'm thinking, who wrote these? That just blows my mind. Anyway, did they hire someone from Hollywood for some fantasy script to write some of these things? But anyway, here are Trump's executive actions that he passed just in the first few hours. Here they are. Number one, restoring names that honor American greatness. That's great, I think. I think it's ridiculous for us to be removing the names off of monuments that were important in our history and men who were important in our history in order to rewrite history. I agree with that completely. How about this executive order? Designating cartels and other organizations as foreign terrorist organizations and specially designated global terrorists. So he said he's now given the ability to call a spade here. Finally, well, we can't name that a terrorist organization because even though there's a great threat, and even though, watch them carry explosives across the border. Isn't that amazing? But we can't label them as terrorists. Now he said, no. If you come to do us harm and you're coming from a country to do us harm, we get to look up and label you as terrorists. And when we do that, when we actually put the name terrorist to you, the full force of what we fight terrorism against gets to come against you. So, how about this one? Ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing. And suddenly, just like that, the woke agenda, right on out the door. This one, the defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government. That means this. There are two sexes. That'll be it. Let's take a look at this from a biological truth perspective. It's about time. Just saying. Next executive order. Establishing the Department of Government Efficiency. Okay, necessary. Next executive order. America First policy is sent to the America First policy directive sent to the Secretary of State. Hey, whatever America's interests are, we put that first. That's good. The next executive order I have highlighted here, unleashing Alaska's resource potential. Unleashing Alaska's resource potential. Fantastic. Next executive order, protecting the American people against invasion. Next executive order, reevaluating and realigning United States foreign aid. Basically, he says, what are we pumping this money out to that's outside the U.S., and why are we doing this? Let's look at this and see, is this really necessary? How long have we been doing this? So if you look at and you say, we've been giving foreign aid to these people, and we just need to go back and reevaluate. It's good, I think, that reevaluation of that is good. That's good. It's just as a government check, really. The temporary withdrawal of all areas of the continental shelf from offshore wind leasing, and then the review of the federal government's leasing and permitting practices for wind projects. That means this. This is what you need to understand on this. That means that you have a wind project that's funded. The windmills go up. When they start to deteriorate and decline, they're just left off the coast to just sit there and rot. Because you got all your federal funding and money up front, and it's all been paid for, and it goes zillions of dollars, and you've left this train wreck offshore. Also, it's not extreme. It isn't that efficient. How about we just go back and like we're doing now, where we are in Northeast Georgia, and just, fire up once again and run the dams that we have. When I first came to Northeast Georgia, we went on a tour. They said, we only run these one day a month. Man, fire them up. Get them fired up. Anyway, so declaring a national state of emergency. That was another executive order. Restoring the death penalty and protecting public safety. These are all first few hours. Stopping radical environmentalism so we can provide water to Southern California. Hello. Think that's necessary. The securing of our borders, the realigning the United States refugee admissions program, the unleashing American energy order, the clarifying the military's role in protecting the territorial integrity of the United States order, the America First trade policy order, the proclamation of a national emergency at the southern border order, the holding former government officials accountable for election interference and improper disclosure of sensitive governmental information order, the withdrawing the United States from the World Health Organization order, the application of protecting Americans from foreign adversaries controlled by apps, digital apps, such as TikTok order, the restoring freedom of speech and ending federal censorship order. Anybody else? About time for that, I think. The granting of pardons of those who were found guilty of participating in the January 6th, what they called a riot, but it was basically just a demonstration, I guess, on that day. The pardoning of those, that order, putting America first in international environmental agreements order, which means we go in, and when they look and they say, you Americans, we go, that's not for us. We'll be pulling out of that. Anyway, the delivering emergency price relief for American families and defeating the cost of living crisis order, the hiring freeze on the federal government order, the return to in-person work for the federal government order, and the ending of the weaponization of the federal government order. And there are more on this list. This all happened in the first 24 hours. What else is going on, which is incredible? Well, as soon as this all began, really within just leadership just took place. Within 30 minutes, ICE was released to go around the nation and pick up criminals that we knew were on our soil. And they put them in airplanes. They put, drug cartels, these people that were involved in all of this that had come on to do harm in America, rounding them up, putting them on airplanes. And what's amazing, flying them out. Yes, just yesterday, flying them out to Colombia. And Colombia saying, no, I'm sorry. We don't want our criminals back, and we don't want our cartel and drug lords back. We don't want that. And Trump said, oh, no problem. Then I tell you what we'll do. We'll just add a 50% tax to everything Colombia ships to us. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, if you're a coffee connoisseur, you know that some people like their Colombian coffee. Now, if you're a coffee connoisseur, you know there are better flavors, actually, than Colombian coffee. But it's all a big competition. And now, all of a sudden, the tax on Colombia coffee that's coming into the United States raises 50%, which means the price goes up and people are going to move to a different alternative. And so while they're busy trying to turn our planes around, suddenly Donald Trump says, no problem, 50% tax on everything you ship in. That'll be okay. And they said, oh, no, I'm sorry. Excuse me. I coughed during that statement, and what I meant to say was bring them on home. And suddenly Colombia is bringing home all of our deportees that have been meant to do us harm. Interesting. That's called leadership, ladies and gentlemen. That's where that's where a decision is made and it's actually stuck to. By the way, I know that's a foreign concept after the last 4 years that someone would actually stick to a decision. It's the whole reason why Kamala Harris did not get elected is because she couldn't even find the right word, let alone stick to a decision. At least she came across like that. And that was the opinion of the American people, that she came across like that. The reason why she did not get elected is because of a lack of leadership. And the reason why Donald Trump did get elected is he said, I'm going to do this. She said, well, we'll put together some people and we'll study on how to, blah, blah. But people were tired of hearing that. They want somebody to go in and go, okay, we're going to do this and this. Black and white decisions, no gray area. And that's what Donald Trump has brought. I'll explain that to you in just a second from a biblical principle. But in my pending pile today, I guess, at the border, well, let's just talk about selections real quick before the people that he's selecting to be in charge of these government offices. The person he's putting in as the FBI director is going to overhaul the entire FBI. And we see this on almost every level. We're going to overhaul. We have to. The FBI overhaul begins. We see the CIA that says we need to release some documents here too that have been on hold for the entire time that Biden was in office. All of that. We see all of that actually happening. And then if other miracles wouldn't happen, Bill Maher steps up and says, hey, looks like Trump is cool now. And then he says, yeah, actually, it's kind of cool in moments. Yeah, wow. Suddenly a change of pace. And the whole thing that they're missing, and he even sort of goes into this, the whole thing that they're missing, and the reason why Trump is actually cool is because he actually leads. You might not like it, but he actually leads. And the leadership that is provided, any leadership, folks, listen, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in your workplace, whether you're leading a team, if you're on a mission trip and you lead, somebody to make decisions actually and stick to those decisions and say, here is what we're going to draw the clear vision and stick to it. Yesterday, the Fox News article here says Trump floats gutting the IRS and moving agents to the border armed with guns. He's talking about actually gutting the IRS. He said, I'm not sure that we actually need it, sort of, in points. And, here, he's alluding to that. The new agents that were hired, I think in that article, it read 44,000, I think is what it said. Ultimately, there would have been 88,000 or something agents that had been hired. But he said they're all legit able to carry a gun. Send them to the border to help protect the border. And so that's what they're doing. They're rerouting agents to the border. And he said, I'm not sure we're going to need it with the tax plan. If you actually go into this article, one of the things he says is he begins to talk about in the late 1800s and the early 1900s that because of our tariffs that we actually did have, it eliminated the tax. And so he said, I don't see really where an internal revenue is going to be necessary. He's floated the whole idea of the external revenue at this point. So he's laying this down. Of course, he talks to them about no tax on tips, and there are a number of things that are going to come that are going to be extremely appealing to the American people. And as they do appeal, it's going to help them ease the pain of in their pocket. Now, I watched Vance a little bit as he said it's going to take a little bit for the prices to come down, and he's right. History actually does support that. It takes about a year to 18 months for prices to see the decline of those prices. Inflation, unfortunately, as it goes up, inflation doesn't decline. It stays sort of where it is. I remember watching I watched an old episode of Johnny Carson, and he was talking about how unfathomable it was. He said, can you believe it? I can't believe we're paying 62 cents a gallon at the pump. This was in the 1970s, and they were shocked at paying 62 cents a gallon. And by the time Carter left office, it was, goodness gracious, gas was so expensive. But by the time Reagan actually left office, I remember where gasoline was actually at one point at 86 cents a gallon during the Bush administration. Not $1.86. I'm talking about 86 cents. So we did see some of that come back down as well. We could be seeing that. Some of that, actually. We don't know. I don't know. We have no clue. But at least it's some vision that he's got and has put in place. And then the night and day difference at the border. This is Newsmax, who says, Governor Abbott says it's a night and day difference at the border. You get into this article, and he talks about what the 24-hour period was from January 19th to when Trump literally signed the executive order to let loose the ICE agency, basically to go out there and start in the process within 1 hour. This is what he says. He said within 1 hour of the inauguration, there was the military at the border, and in a 24-hour period, the border was, in effect, shut down. It's a night and day difference. Leadership. That's leadership. And then today, lead headlines this morning. I thought it was really Fox News. Trump to reinstate service members that were discharged for not getting the COVID-19 vaccine. There was nothing constitutional about that anyway, forcing you to take. There's nothing constitutional, even remotely constitutional about that. The division in this nation over the COVID vaccine was terrible in the day. It cost people their jobs. And we let the American military, something like 8,800 members or something like that from the American military go. and other federal agencies, he reinstates them, and he says, you can come back. If you'll come back, we'll give you all the back pay. An official letter of apology from the American government for letting you go, and we'll bring you back in. Just come on back. And I saw that this morning. And there's so much more that is coming. What is this? What just happened here? Leadership came to the White House. Again, it did. And every time that leadership truly does come to the White House, we can look through the 20th century and see every time that leadership came to the White House. There were times when there was no leadership in the White House. And even when the leadership cost Americans a great deal, things like the great programs, like last week I talked to you about Woodrow Wilson and the great expansion of government, and FDR and its greater expansion, and Johnson trying to lead with the Great Society. At least there was some leadership in office. In Jimmy Carter's days, there was a lot of wavering going back and forth there. If you back up in the 20th century, presidents like Warren Harding, there was no leadership during Warren Harding's presidency, one of the worst presidents we ever had as far as not being a leader. And then we have Mr. Biden. And don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. Am I telling you, I think Biden did all he knew to do. No doubt. I'm not sure he knew what to do. But the one thing he wanted to do was go down in history having been the president of the United States. He wanted the position and he wanted the power. But that did not equate to effective leadership. Donald Trump neither wants the position, he neither wants the position or the power. And he said that from day one. Donald Trump walks in, he wants to lead, and he wants to lead in such a way that America becomes the leader of the world. Is it about our power? It's about the protection of our people. It's true. That's exactly, if you watch and you sit down, it is about that. There are people that are upset about the changes in, or the rescinding the citizenship birthright. All upset about that. That order was written and sent so that the Supreme Court could define exactly what that amendment in the Constitution says. That article of the Constitution. They're going to define that finally, get it finally defined and settled. That's leadership. Hey, we can't waffle back and forth on this. Let's get a black and white answer here. Let's let the Supreme Court settle that. It's a great decision. And you're going to see more of that come. Now you're also seeing, I also saw that there is a bill that is about to be written and introduced. And that bill that's about to be written and introduced, it says here that they're also going to try to redefine, or not redefine, but establish, redefine, I guess, if you want to add words to the fact of the amendment, the 22nd Amendment, that prevents a person from serving as president for more than 2 terms. And they're going to try to add the word consecutive that's there, and that the maximum would be 3 terms, so that the agenda that Trump starts, he could actually continue on for 8 years if he wanted to, if he got elected again. And so based on that, so we'll see. I hear people say, "Oh, that'll never change." It's hard to change a constitutional amendment. It's hard. It is, and it is really hard to change. It's hard to change that. But we'll see what happens. We don't know. And people are getting excited. Oh, he could serve a second term. Let me explain. I think that he's going to serve exactly the amount of time that the Lord has set for him to serve. So whether he serves 4 or 8 years, whatever, it's going to be up to how God moves in the middle of it. There's nothing by chance. We've been in a study of Proverbs lately. There's nothing by chance that takes place And leaders are placed in authority and in places for the movement of God. Why is leadership important? Well, it says this. Proverbs 29:18, and there's a couple of different translations of this. It says, where there is no vision, the people perish. But he that keepeth the law, happy is he. Or another translation of that says, where there is no revelation, the people cast off restraint. But blessed is the one who heeds wisdom's instruction. Here is the thing about it. When it comes down to it, vision is necessary. A revelation of what is going to happen, a clear, concise picture of where we're moving is necessary. And when there is that clear, concise movement, happy are the people. Happy is the nation. That's what I'm telling you. In Walmart the other night, the attitude change is all about the fact that there is actually someone at the helm that is leading, and Americans actually feel protected and secure. And this goes along with parenting as well. There are guidelines that you have to set for your children. They will continually push the lines of what your guidelines are. They'll push the limits of what those are so that they can understand the boundaries that you placed on their life to protect them. And that's so that they don't grow up and self-destruct and either take their life by their own hand or move to something that will cost them their life because they have no fear of anything. Since the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, actually we see fear is very valuable. It really is. It's the beginning of how to learn. And if there is no fear in anything, a child will self-destruct. An adult will self-destruct. They'll push the lines. They'll cast off the restraint if there's nothing there to enforce it, which is why leadership is important. And the people who live basically inside of those lines, and in the United States, the people who live within the lines of this morality, this Judeo-Christian morality that actually is there, there's a freedom. And there's a lifting of the spirits that is in there. It's the feeling of not only being protected, but that something great is actually being done. Proverbs 11:14 says this, for lack of guidance, a nation falls, but victory is won through many advisors. There has to be a clear, concise picture of guidance. We got to be guiding somewhere, not just opening the doors to let anything that you want, however you feel, happen. It doesn't work that way. People get upset, they get confused, they scatter, they don't know what to do. And when you draw the lines and say, we need to live within these bounds, and the lines that are being drawn right now, those lines are being drawn saying America needs to return to its constitutional foundation. America needs to return to what Trump is saying here, biological truth. America's needing to return to actual truth and a foundation that we know and believe works. I talked about this in last week's podcast as well. Well, the groups of atheists that have come together that said if America has any hope, she's going to have to come back to true Christianity for that to happen in order to define the morality that has taken us way off base. Well, that is a part of the restoration that is here. Otherwise, what we've done, to be honest with you, is we've opened up the doors in a 4-year period, and we've let anybody who wants to come and any thought that there's been no true key of what we're headed for. It's like every single gate has been opened up from the border to morality to whatever, and just said, hey, whatever, just come on and just do whatever you want. You cannot, absolutely cannot run a nation allowing any individual to do whatever you want. And then what was even worse than that are the ones that actually wanted to really follow the guidelines of morality were penalized for the fact that they were going to follow those guidelines. Because you put those guidelines in place, the ones who didn't want any, that were free to come and just ravage the United States in any way they possibly could, were upset. And because you upset this individual by your morality and the lines that you want to live in your life, it's now a criminal offense. That's exactly what it had been moving to, that we're now being moved out of. Because what Donald Trump is saying, no, we gather together For these purposes, and it's important, some lines have to be drawn. In order for the nation to be free, some lines have to be drawn. And not everybody can just kind of rush onto the border and do whatever they want according to whatever it is that they feel like. And that you can't just rush onto the border. There have to be some guidelines on who we're going to agree to be together. And in order for that to happen, we've got to go back to the nation's foundation. And that's exactly what we're trying to go back to. It's called leadership. And that's not easy. When you've opened up the gates, and you've opened up the gates of all the borders, and you've opened up the gates and said anything goes. When you literally opened up the gates and just and torn the gates down and let fantasy ravage the nation in every single possible way, no one knows what they believe or where they're headed. And the ones that do have a belief don't cling to it long, and they move on to something else because of the confusion that's going on throughout the nation. It's time to stop. And that's leadership. And that is what Donald Trump is trying to do. And for the most part, where I stand and where we are, and in our local community and in other places, there is an overall lightening of the countenance and the spirits of individuals right now, and an excitement because someone finally is pointing and steering the great nation of the United States in some sort of direction. And guess what? Throughout history, that always happens. And I could go into all those historical things. I'm not going to do it at this point. I just want you to know what in the world just happened here. What is it? The title of this podcast has been What Just Happened Here? Leadership came to America. You've been listening to Grounded, the place to hear the salty truth. I'm your host, Scott Cates. What does all this mean? Well, the truth of the matter is everyone needs some sort of leadership in their life. There needs to be some sort of guidance that is beyond you, by the way. That's important. If you are your own final authority, at some point you self-destruct. Somebody's got to lead us. The scripture says the heart is desperately wicked. We will just literally walk off the cliff, basically. So what does that mean? Well, it starts at the personal governing of the soul, the personal governing of the heart. And that begins literally, to be honest with you, in faith. What is it that actually tames the heart? Well, Christ Jesus does that. It takes that transformation of becoming a new creature that is led by the Spirit of God. Defined oftentimes by John in John and actually 1 John as light and darkness is the difference. To be able to be transformed, to be able to walk in light, if you will, you have to know Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord. Without that, how do you get there? Well, first of all, you've got to recognize this. It's important that you understand. In 1 John chapter 1, it talks about the fact that if we confess our sins, he is faithful and he's just to forgive us of our sins and cleanse us of all unrighteousness. What does that all mean? It means when we come to Jesus and we say, Lord, forgive me of my sins, that's what's in the way between you and me. Can't even walk in the light until those sins are actually taken care of because we are creatures of darkness because of those sins according to the scripture. The reality is we come to Christ, and that light that is so incredibly bright of righteousness comes in, cleanses absolutely every piece of who we are, and forgives us of our sins yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And it's an amazing thing. It says in the scriptures, it says, as many as who has received him, in John chapter 1, he gave them the right to become the children of God. This is important. The receiving of Jesus is key. Will you accept Christ? It's not something you work for. It's not something that you earn. It's a free gift of God. Will you come and ask for the forgiveness of your sins and allow Jesus Christ to lead you and give you an opportunity to literally walk with God. That is up to you. Will you actually stop where you are and say, Lord, forgive me of my sins? Lord, take the darkness out of my life, pour the light to it, and help me to walk in the light from this day forward. Thank you for saving me from my sins, which would cast me into outer darkness and destruction as a result of those, so that now I can walk and be where you are. You can stop right where you are and ask Jesus to forgive you of your sins and save you today. If you're a believer in Jesus Christ, I just encourage you, lead like one. Lead like a believer. Lead with those Judeo-Christian morals. Lead out with those. Lead the people who are around you. If you're working, work with a work ethic, like you believe in Jesus. If you're dealing with people around you, apply the grace that is necessary. Let your love and your light shine before men. It's transformational. I've gone way over the time today, I know. But I'm so glad that you've listened. What just happened here? Leadership came. Folks, that's a good thing. Thanks for listening today. I will see you next Monday.